The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, the kind of hour when the world feels suspended between yesterday's failures and tomorrow's fight. James Thompson jerked awake in his small bedroom in East Hartford, Connecticut, fumbling for the cell phone vibrating against the particle board nightstand he'd bought secondhand 4 years ago when everything else had fallen apart. The screen read Children's Hospital Emergency. His heart stopped before his lungs remembered how to work. "Mr. Thompson, this is Nurse Rodriguez from Hartford Children's. Your daughter Emily's heart rate just spiked to 160 beats per minute. We need you here immediately. She's stable but asking for you." The world narrowed to 3 facts. Emily. Hospital. Now. James was moving before the call ended, pulling on yesterday's jeans and the first shirt his hands found in the dark. 7 years old. Mitral valve prolapse, the cardiologist had said when Emily was 4. Usually benign but requires monitoring. Usually. That word had haunted every parent-teacher conference, every playground run, every moment his daughter's hand pressed against her small chest with a confused expression that said her body was doing something she didn't understand. The Honda Civic's engine turned over on the 3rd try. September rain streaked the windshield as James pulled onto empty streets, the city asleep except for the people racing toward emergencies or running from them. 22 minutes from his apartment to the hospital. He made it in 14. The fluorescent lights in the pediatric emergency wing turned everything the color of fear. A receptionist with kind eyes and exhausted posture pointed him toward room 7 before he could finish Emily's name. His daughter sat upright in a bed too large for her, wires running from her chest to a monitor that beeped with mechanical certainty. Her brown eyes, Linda's eyes, locked onto him with relief so profound it cracked something in his chest. "Daddy!" Not scared, just waiting for him to make it better because that's what fathers did. "Right here, sweetheart, right here." Dr. Patel appeared in scrubs that suggested he'd been woken up too, reviewing a chart with the focused calm of someone who'd delivered bad news enough times to perfect the delivery. "Mr. Thompson, Emily experienced a tachycardic episode. Her heart rate elevated rapidly during sleep. We've stabilized her, but I want to run additional tests. The valve prolapse is showing increased regurgitation. We may be looking at intervention sooner than we'd hoped." Intervention. The medical euphemism for surgery. For slicing open his 7-year-old daughter's chest and repairing the valve that was supposed to have been fine. Usually fine. Nothing to worry about. "How soon?" James kept his voice steady because Emily was watching, reading his face the way she'd learned to read his moods since Linda died, and it became just the 2 of them against a world that didn't slow down for grief. "We'll know more after the echocardiogram tomorrow." "But Mr. Thompson." Dr. Patel's eyes held the weight of numbers James didn't want to hear. "If we do need to proceed, we're looking at approximately $120,000. I know your insurance situation." James's insurance situation. The health plan through Horizon Capital Management covered 70% after the deductible he could barely afford. 70% of $120,000 still left $36,000 he didn't have, added to the $47,000 in medical debt still haunting him from Linda's final 6 months. From the ovarian cancer that had taken her when Emily was 3 and James was 34, and the world had stopped making promises it intended to keep. "We'll figure it out." The lie tasted familiar. He'd been telling it for 4 years. Dr. Patel's expression said he'd heard that lie before too, from other parents in other emergency rooms, but he nodded because what else was there to do? "Emily can go home in a few hours. Keep her calm, no strenuous activity. Follow up with Dr. Martinez on Friday." Keep her calm, as if calm was currency he could afford. By the time James carried Emily to the car at 5:30 a.m., the rain had stopped, but the sky remained the gray of something unfinished. She dozed against his shoulder, small and warm and alive, her heart beating against his chest at a rate the monitor had declared acceptable for now. For now. Everything in James's life had been measured in for now since Linda's oncologist had used those same words 4 years ago while explaining why the treatment wasn't working. He'd made Linda a promise the night she died. September 14th, 4 years ago this month, in a hospice room that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and the particular silence that comes before a life ends. She'd gripped his hand with strength that shouldn't have existed in someone that sick, her voice barely more than breath. Take care of our girl, show her what good men do, show her what I can't. James had promised. Of course he'd promised. What else could a man do when the woman he loved was leaving and their daughter was asleep down the hall, 3 years old and unaware that tomorrow would be the first day of a different life? He'd kept that promise through toddler tantrums and kindergarten meetings and the slow, grinding work of learning to be both mother and father to a child who asked questions about why other kids had 2 parents and she only had 1. He'd kept it through 50-hour work weeks as a senior financial analyst at Horizon Capital Management. Through parent-teacher conferences where he was the only father in a room full of mothers, through bedtime stories and skinned knees and the particular terror of raising a daughter when the person who was supposed to teach her how to be a woman was gone. But promises didn't pay medical bills. And James Thompson, at 38 years old, had exactly $4,217 in his savings account and a stack of payment plans with Hartford Medical Center that felt less like a plan and more like a slow drowning. The apartment was quiet when they arrived. Emily went back to sleep in her room with the glow-in-the-dark stars Linda had stuck to the ceiling when they'd first moved in. James sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee he didn't remember making and stared at the stack of medical bills he'd hidden under the phone book so Emily wouldn't see $47,000 in remaining debt from Linda's treatment. $8,300 in current outstanding balances for Emily's cardiology appointments. Now potentially $36,000 more if the surgery became necessary, which Dr. Patel's eyes had suggested was when, not if. The numbers blurred. James blinked hard and checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. He was supposed to be at the office by 8:30 for the weekly analyst briefing. Missing it would raise questions. Missing it 2 hours after an emergency room visit with his daughter would require explanations he didn't want to give, because the moment people knew you were struggling was the moment they started treating you like you were broken, like you couldn't handle the work, like maybe you needed to step back and focus on your family, which was corporate. Speak for, we're going to ease you out. James had dignity. He'd built a career on competence and reliability and the ability to analyze investment portfolios with the kind of precision that made clients feel safe trusting him with their millions while he struggled to pay his own bills. That dignity was the only thing separating him from charity, from being the single father people pitied instead of respected. He showered, dressed in the charcoal suit he'd bought on sale 3 years ago and maintained carefully because he couldn't afford another. Checked on Emily, who was sleeping with her arms wrapped around the stuffed telescope Linda had given her for her 4th birthday, back when they'd thought they had more time. By 7:30 a.m., James was in the Honda, driving south toward downtown Hartford in the gleaming tower that housed Horizon Capital Management. The building rose 23 stories, all glass and steel, and the architectural confidence of money that never worried about hospital bills. He parked in the underground garage where the fluorescent lights hummed with the same exhausted frequency as his thoughts, grabbed his briefcase and rode the elevator to the 14th floor where the analyst pool worked in an open floor plan designed to promote collaboration and actually just made everyone's phone calls audible to everyone else. The office was already half full. Monday's briefing had been canceled for some executive emergency, which meant today's would be twice as long. James headed for his desk, nodding at familiar faces, maintaining the careful performance of a man whose life was under control as... James, The voice came from directly behind him, crisp and controlled and belonging to someone who didn't make casual visits to the 14th floor. He turned. Rebecca Morgan stood 3 feet away in a navy suit that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Her dark hair pulled back in the kind of severe precision that matched her reputation. CEO of Horizon Capital Management. 41 years old, the woman who'd taken a mid-tier investment firm and turned it into one of the most respected names in the Northeast by being smarter, harder, and colder than everyone else in the room. James had interacted with her maybe 6 times in his 5 years at the company. She operated from the executive suite on the 23rd floor, a world of corner offices and decisions that moved millions. She didn't visit the analyst pool. She didn't know his name, except apparently she did. Ms. Morgan. He kept his voice professional, neutral, because showing up 2 hours late and having the CEO waiting at your desk was not a scenario that ended well. You're late. Not an accusation, just a fact, delivered with the emotional inflection of someone reading a weather report. I apologize. There was a family emergency. It won't happen again. Rebecca's gray eyes studied him with the kind of focused attention that made grown men in boardrooms nervous. She was known for that, the ability to look at someone and see past the performance to whatever truth they were hiding. It was part of what made her good at her job, and rumor had it terrible at maintaining any kind of personal relationship. The Morrison account. She said it like he should know what she meant. James's mind raced. Marcus Morrison, the billionaire tech entrepreneur with the impossible portfolio and the reputation for burning through analysts like kindling. 3 senior analysts had quit his account in the past 18 months. The running joke was that Morrison didn't want financial advice. He wanted a therapist who spoke in stock tickers. What about it? James managed. It's yours, effective immediately. Jackson transferred to Boston yesterday. Morrison needs continuity. I'm told you're the best analyst on this floor. Prove it. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling out with implications James didn't have time to process. The Morrison account was legendary. It was also high profile, high stress, and high reward. Success meant visibility. Visibility meant opportunities. Opportunities meant money. Money meant Emily's surgery. I'll need 48 hours to review the existing portfolio structure. James heard himself say it, heard the confidence in his voice that was part performance and part the truth that he was actually very good at his job when the world gave him half a chance. You have 24. Morrison's calling Thursday at 9 a.m. Be ready. Rebecca turned to leave, then paused. James, the family emergency. Is everything resolved? The question caught him off guard. CEOs didn't ask about family emergencies. They noted the absence, calculated the liability, and moved on. It's managed. Thank you for asking. Good. I need you focused. This account matters. She walked away with the decisive efficiency of someone who'd already dismissed the conversation and moved on to the next crisis in a schedule that probably didn't include room for things like lunch or human interaction. James stood next to his desk while the office buzzed around him, analysts arguing about quarterly projections and arguing about the Patriots game and living lives where a 2 a.m. hospital visit wasn't the defining event of their week. The Morrison account. 24 hours to prepare. Thursday at 9 a.m. He could do this. He'd built his career on doing the impossible while holding his life together with duct tape and determination. This was just one more impossible thing. By Wednesday at midnight, James had consumed enough coffee to fuel a small city and rebuilt Morrison's entire portfolio strategy from scratch. The previous analyst had been playing it safe, standard diversification across tech and real estate with minimal risk and minimal return. Morrison wasn't paying premium fees for minimal anything. He wanted aggressive growth balanced against calculated risk, wanted to see his money working as hard as he'd worked to earn it. James gave him that. He restructured the tech holdings to focus on emerging AI infrastructure, reallocated the real estate investments toward commercial developments in secondary markets showing population growth, created a tiered risk model that allowed for experimental holdings in cryptocurrency-adjacent ventures without exposing more than 8% of the total portfolio. It was good work, better than good. It was the kind of analysis that reminded James why he'd gone into finance in the first place, back when he was 23 and ambitious and believed competence was enough. Thursday morning arrived with rain that matched Tuesday's mood. James picked Emily up from his mother's house at 7:30 a.m., her overnight bag decorated with hand-drawn stars in purple marker. Linda's favorite color. Emily drew everything in purple now, filling notebooks with crayon galaxies and marker constellations, telling anyone who asked that purple was the color of space, which was where her mom lived now, among the stars. "How's my brilliant girl?" James buckled her into the back seat, checking her face for signs of fatigue or distress. "Doctor." Martinez had cleared her for school with restrictions. No gym class, no running, no stress. As if childhood came with an off switch for stress. "I drew a picture yesterday. Want to see?" Emily pulled a piece of construction paper from her bag. The drawing showed 3 figures in crayon. A tall man in brown, a small girl in purple, and a woman in gray with no mouth. "This is beautiful, sweetheart. Who's this?" James pointed to the woman. "The lady with no smile. She was at Grandma's house, but she wasn't really there. She was in my head." Emily said it with the casual certainty of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet learned to question her own observations. "She looks sad, like she wants to smile but forgot how." James studied the drawing. The woman in gray. Something about the severe lines and the careful detail tugged at recognition. But Emily was already talking about her astronomy book and whether Pluto should count as a planet, and he filed the observation away for later. He dropped her at Riverside Elementary at 8:15 a.m., watching until she disappeared through the doors with her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Then he drove to Horizon Capital with the Morrison file open on the passenger seat, reviewing numbers until they were embedded in his memory deeper than his own phone number. Marcus Morrison called at exactly 9 a.m. His voice was sharp, impatient, the vocal equivalent of someone checking their watch. "Thompson, talk to me about the cryptocurrency play. 8% feels conservative for someone my age." James had expected this. "With respect, Mr. Morrison, 8% is aggressive for volatile assets in a portfolio your size. We're not building a retirement fund. We're protecting generational wealth while pursuing growth. The crypto allocation gives you exposure to emerging markets without risking core holdings if the sector crashes, which historically it does every 18 to 24 months. Silence on the line. James waited, letting the analysis speak for itself. "The AI infrastructure play, that's new." Morrison's tone had shifted from impatient to interested. "The previous strategy was reactive. You were investing in established tech companies after they'd already proven the concept. I'm suggesting we move upstream, targeting the infrastructure companies that enable AI development. Server farms, chip manufacturers, data storage solutions. Less flashy than the headline companies, but better margins and more sustainable growth." Another pause, then. "You've been on this account for 72 hours. "Yes, sir." "You just rebuilt a strategy that Jackson spent 18 months assembling." "Yes, sir, because Jackson was managing your account like you were risk-averse. You're not. You're strategic. There's a difference." Marcus Morrison laughed, a sharp bark of sound that suggested he didn't do it often. "Thursday at 2 p.m. I want projections for the next quarter. And Thompson, don't make me regret trusting you." The call ended. James sat back in his chair, feeling the first flutter of something that might have been hope, or might have been the early stages of a stress-induced heart attack. The Morrison account. He'd just defended a complete portfolio restructure to a billionaire known for destroying careers when disappointed. And the billionaire had laughed. Impressive. Rebecca Morgan stood in the open doorway of the small conference room he'd been using, her expression unreadable. Morrison just called me directly. Said you're the first analyst in 2 years who understood he wasn't paying for babysitting. James stood reflexively, years of corporate conditioning making him straighten his spine when the CEO appeared. I gave him what he needed, not what felt safe. That's a dangerous philosophy in this business. Respectfully, Ms. Morgan, safe doesn't build wealth. Strategic risk does. Morrison knows that. Most of our clients forgot it. Something shifted in Rebecca's expression. A crack in the professional mask so brief James almost missed it. Walk with me. It wasn't a request. He followed her out of the conference room, past the analyst pool where everyone suddenly became very focused on their screens, toward the elevators. She pressed the button for the 23rd floor. Executive suite, the place where decisions happened and careers ended. The elevator doors closed. Rebecca didn't speak until they were moving. How's your daughter? The question came without warning, delivered in the same neutral tone she used for everything else. She's managing. Thank you for asking. James kept his answer careful, professional. Personal questions from the CEO were minefields dressed as courtesy. The family emergency Tuesday morning, medical? Rebecca watched the floor numbers climb with focused intensity like the answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. James calculated his response. Lying to the CEO was grounds for termination. Admitting vulnerability was career suicide. Yes, my daughter has a heart condition. It required immediate attention. Is she stable? For now. The elevator stopped. 23rd floor. The doors opened onto a reception area where the carpet was thicker and the art on the walls was original instead of corporate prints. Rebecca's office was at the end of the hall, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of downtown Hartford spreading toward the Connecticut River. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she led him to a smaller conference room with a table that could seat 8 and currently seated 0. She closed the door. I'm going to tell you something, James, and I need you to keep it confidential. Rebecca stood with her back to the windows backlit by gray morning light that turned her silhouette into something almost fragile. I had cancer, breast cancer, diagnosed 14 months ago. I had surgery, 6 rounds of chemotherapy. I'm in remission now, but the experience taught me something about what matters. James didn't know what to say. The CEO of Horizon Capital Management, the woman known for running board meetings like military operations, was standing in a conference room admitting to a vulnerability that could tank investor confidence if it became public knowledge. I'm glad you're well. The words felt inadequate, but sincerity carried weight when you meant it. I fought it alone, completely alone, not because I didn't have people I could call, but because I'd spent 20 years building a career that left no room for people I could call when it mattered. Rebecca's voice remained steady, factual, like she was analyzing market trends instead of her own life. I'm telling you this because on Tuesday you showed up here 2 hours late after a hospital visit with your daughter. You could have called in sick, could have taken emergency leave. Instead, you came to work because you needed to maintain the performance that this job is under control. It is under control. The lie was automatic. No, it's not. Your daughter has a heart condition that might require surgery you can't afford. You're carrying debt from your wife's death. You just took on the most demanding account in this firm because you need the performance bonus if you succeed. Rebecca met his eyes directly. I recognize survival when I see it, James. I've been doing it for years. The truth sat between them like something alive and dangerous. James could deny it, could maintain the performance of competence and control, Or he could stand here in front of the CEO of the company and admit that he was one major medical bill away from drowning. He chose dignity instead of either. I have a 7-year-old daughter who lost her mother when she was 3. I work 50-hour weeks in a job I'm good at so I can afford an apartment in a safe neighborhood in a school that doesn't have metal detectors. I'm carrying debt, yes, and Emily might need surgery I can't currently afford. But I show up here every day and I do excellent work because that's what good men do. We take care of our families, we maintain our dignity. We don't ask for charity and we don't make our problems someone else's burden. James kept his voice level, professional. If that's survival, then yes, Ms. Morgan. I'm surviving, and I'm doing it without compromising my work or making excuses. Rebecca studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. The Morrison account comes with a 30% performance bonus if you retain him through year-end. That's 9 weeks. He's happy today. Keep him happy. That bonus is $43,000. The number hit James like a physical thing. 43,000. Enough to cover Emily's surgery and make a serious dent in the remaining debt. Enough to breathe. I'll keep him happy. Not a promise. A statement of intent. Good, because I'm also assigning you the Westbrook portfolio next week. Combined, if you succeed, you're looking at an additional $60,000 in quarterly bonuses. Rebecca moved toward the door, then stopped. James, I don't do charity either. I'm giving you these accounts because you're the best analyst on that floor and I need the best. But I also remember what it's like to fight alone, so fight well. And don't let pride kill you before the work does. She left. James stood in the empty conference room 23 floors above Hartford while the rain started again outside, streaking the windows with water that caught the light like something precious. $43,000, plus 60 more. $103,000 total if he could hold the Morrison account and add Westbrook successfully. Enough to cover Emily's surgery, pay down the debt, maybe even save something for the inevitable next crisis, because there was always a next crisis. He had 9 weeks to prove he was worth keeping alive. By Friday afternoon, James had prepared the quarterly projections Morrison demanded and drafted preliminary analysis for the Westbrook portfolio. His desk was covered in reports. His coffee mug had been refilled 6 times, and Emily was at his mother's house drawing purple stars and asking questions about whether astronauts ever got lonely in space. James had picked her up Thursday evening, made her favorite dinner, mac and cheese with the shapes, not the regular kind, and listened to her explain a book about black holes with the kind of enthusiasm that made his chest hurt in a good way. She'd fallen asleep during the astronomy documentary they watched together, her small hand wrapped around his thumb, her breathing steady and unlabored. The monitor at the hospital had said her heart rate was stable. Dr. Martinez had scheduled the follow-up echocardiogram for next Wednesday. Every day between now and then was a day they had, and James had learned 4 years ago that you counted the days you had because the calendar made no promises about tomorrow. Mr. Thompson, the voice was young, nervous. An intern from HR stood at his desk with a folder and an expression that suggested she'd drawn the short straw on an unpleasant assignment. Ms. Morgan needs to see you in her office, now, if possible. James saved his work, grabbed his phone, and followed the intern back to the elevators. 23rd floor again. Rebecca's actual office this time, not a conference room. Her assistant waved him through with the tired smile of someone who'd been fielding executive emergencies all day. Rebecca sat behind a desk that was somehow both massive and uncluttered, reviewing something on her laptop with the focused intensity of a sniper acquiring a target. She looked up when James entered. "Close the door." He did. The office was quiet in the way expensive spaces were quiet, insulated from the world by money and architectural design. The view from her windows showed the city spreading toward the horizon, All glass towers and old brick buildings trying to coexist in a downtown that couldn't decide if it was finance or history. The Morrison call went well. He's staying through year-end, possibly longer. Rebecca closed her laptop. Which means you're on track for that bonus. Thank you. James waited for the other shoe to drop because good news in a CEO's office always came with complications. I need a favor, personal, not professional. Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. There's a quarterly board dinner tomorrow night. Mandatory attendance for C-suite executives. My ex-fiancé, Kenneth Anderson, sits on the board. He's been persistent about reconciling. I need a buffer. James processed the request carefully. Buffer. Not a date, but a presence. Someone to make the ex-fiancé think twice about whatever persistence meant in this context. With respect, Ms. Morgan, I'm a single father with a 7-year-old daughter who has a heart condition. I don't do performances. Emily needs stability, not a father who's playing pretend boyfriend for his boss's benefit. The words came out harder than he'd intended, but he'd spent 4 years learning the difference between opportunities and traps. This felt like the latter. Rebecca's expression didn't change, but something in her posture shifted. Surprise maybe, or respect, or the corporate recalculation that happened when someone said no to the CEO. You're right, I apologize, that was inappropriate. She said it simply, without defensiveness or rationalization. I shouldn't have asked. James nodded. Is there anything else? No, thank you for your honesty. He left the office feeling like he'd just passed a test he hadn't known he was taking. The CEO of Horizon Capital Management had asked him for personal help, and he'd refused on principle, maintaining the boundary between professional competence and personal entanglement. It was the right call, the dignified call. It was also the call that meant he'd just turned down the woman who controlled his career trajectory and his access to the bonuses that would save his daughter's life. James rode the elevator down to the 14th floor, collected his briefcase, and drove home through Friday rush hour traffic while his brain played out every possible consequence of that conversation. Rebecca Morgan didn't strike him as someone who accepted rejection gracefully. She was known for being fair but unforgiving, for holding people to standards they didn't know existed until they failed to meet them. By the time he picked Emily up from his mother's house, he'd convinced himself he'd just committed career suicide in the name of dignity. Saturday morning brought unexpected sunshine and a text message at 7:45 a.m. from a number James didn't recognize. James, it's Rebecca Morgan. I wanted to apologize again for yesterday. You were right to refuse. I was out of line asking. Enjoy your weekend with your daughter. He stared at the message, reading it 3 times to confirm the CEO of his company had just texted him an apology on a Saturday morning. Then Emily called from her bedroom, asking if they could go to the Science Museum, and James filed the message away in the growing folder of things about Rebecca Morgan that didn't match her reputation. The Connecticut Science Center was Emily's favorite place in the world after her bedroom. They spent 4 hours in the planetarium and the physics exhibits, Emily asking questions faster than James could answer them. She loved the planetarium show about exoplanets, sitting in the dark while stars wheeled overhead, and the narrator explained how scientists found planets around distant suns. Daddy, if Mommy's in the stars, can she see all the planets? Emily's hand found his in the darkness, small and warm and trusting. I think she can see everything from up there, sweetheart. All the planets and all the stars and everything beautiful we haven't discovered yet. Good, because I want to tell her about the lady with no smile. I think maybe the lady's sad because she's lonely like the planets that don't have suns. James looked down at his daughter's face lit by the projected stars, her expression serious with the kind of observation that children made when they saw the world more clearly than adults wanted to admit. What lady, Em? The one I drew, the lady in gray. She was at Grandma's but also at your work, I think. In your head, like how Mommy's in mine. Emily squeezed his hand. I think she needs someone to teach her how to smile again, like you did after Mommy left. The drawing, the woman in gray with no mouth, the severe lines and careful detail that had tugged at recognition 3 days ago, suddenly clicked into focus with perfect, uncomfortable clarity. Emily had drawn Rebecca Morgan. His 7-year-old daughter, who'd never met the CEO, had somehow captured her in crayon with the kind of perceptive accuracy that made James's chest tighten. The lady with no smile, lonely like planets without suns. He didn't know what to do with that observation, so he did what he'd been doing for 4 years. He held his daughter's hand and watched the stars wheel overhead, and promised himself he was doing enough. He was being enough. He was keeping the promise he'd made to a dying woman in a hospice room that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and failure. That promise was all he had left that felt like solid ground. Monday morning arrived with the kind of October cold that made Hartford feel like it was practicing for winter. James dropped Emily at school with extra instructions for the nurse about her heart medication and a note excusing her from gym class for the 3rd week running. She'd complained about being left out, about watching her friends play kickball while she sat on the bleachers with a book about Mars rovers. But Dr. Martinez had been clear. No elevated heart rate until after Wednesday's echocardiogram. The Morrison account consumed James's week like a living thing that demanded constant feeding. Marcus Morrison called Tuesday at 6:47 a.m., before markets opened, wanting real-time analysis on overnight tech sector movement in Asia. He called again Thursday at 2:15 p.m. to discuss whether the AI infrastructure play was overexposed to Chinese manufacturing. Each call was a test. Each answer had to be precise, confident, backed by data Morrison could verify independently if he chose. James passed every test. By Friday, Morrison's tone had shifted from skeptical to something approaching trust, that rare quality in finance where a client stopped questioning every recommendation and started asking what else you saw coming. The Westbrook portfolio arrived on James's desk Wednesday afternoon via encrypted email from Rebecca's office. Patricia Harris, the account holder, was old money from Greenwich with holdings that read like a museum catalog: municipal bonds, blue-chip dividends, real estate investment trusts managed so conservatively they barely outpaced inflation. She was 62, widowed, and according to the file notes, terrified of losing principal even if it meant missing growth. James spent Wednesday night after Emily fell asleep restructuring the approach. Patricia Harris didn't need aggressive returns. She needed security with modest appreciation, the financial equivalent of a garden that required minimal maintenance but still bloomed reliably. He drafted a proposal shifting 15% of her holdings into infrastructure bonds backed by federal projects, added a small position in healthcare REITs, serving aging populations, and left the rest exactly where it was. Because sometimes the best analysis was knowing what not to touch. Thursday morning at 9 a.m., Rebecca called his desk directly. "Coffee. Downstairs lobby. 10 minutes. The line went dead before James could respond. The lobby coffee shop was generic corporate, serving overpriced espresso to executives who expensed everything and administrative staff who paid out of pocket. Rebecca sat at a corner table away from the main traffic flow, 2 cups already waiting. She'd chosen something without windows, James noticed, private by positioning rather than walls. "The Westbrook proposal is excellent." Rebecca slid 1 coffee across the table as he sat. "Patricia's reviewing it this afternoon. She's careful, but she trusts my judgment. You'll have the account by Monday." "Thank you." James wrapped his hands around the cup, feeling heat seep through cheap paper. "How's Emily?" The question landed differently than it had the previous week. Less corporate courtesy, more genuine interest threading through the professional veneer. James weighed his answer carefully. Rebecca Morgan was still his boss. Personal details were still weapons in the wrong context. Echocardiogram yesterday showed the valve regurgitation is progressing. Dr. Martinez wants to schedule surgery within 6 weeks. Before Christmas, ideally, so her recovery doesn't conflict with second-grade finals. What's the cost? Direct, no pretense of dancing around the number both of them knew mattered. $120,000 total. Insurance covers 70% after deductible. I'm responsible for $36,000. James kept his voice level, factual, like they were discussing portfolio allocations instead of his daughter's heart. Combined with existing debt, I'm looking at $83,000 outstanding. Rebecca absorbed this information with the same focused attention she gave quarterly reports. The Morrison bonus hits in 9 weeks. Westbrook adds another $23,000 quarterly if you retain her through year-end. That's $66,000 by January, which leaves me $17,000 short before factoring in the surgery timing. James had run these numbers so many times the calculations lived in his bones. I'm working on it. I'm sure you are. Rebecca's fingers traced the edge of her coffee cup, a rare break in her usual stillness. Can I tell you something about fighting alone? It becomes a habit. You convince yourself that asking for help is weakness, that accepting support is admitting failure. And then one day you're sitting in a chemotherapy chair with no one to drive you home and you realize the difference between strength and stubbornness. The coffee shop noise faded into background static. Rebecca Morgan was sharing something that felt less like professional advice and more like hard-won truth delivered by someone who'd paid full price for the lesson. I appreciate that, but I'm not fighting alone. I have Emily, I have my mother, I have a job that pays well and a career I'm good at. James met her eyes directly. What I don't have is the luxury of asking my CEO for help with personal problems. That's not strength or stubbornness, that's maintaining boundaries that keep this professional. Even if those boundaries cost you. Rebecca's voice carried the weight of someone who understood the price of walls built too high. Especially then. Intent doesn't erase impact, but neither does good intention excuse crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. James stood, picking up his coffee. Thank you for the Westbrook account. I'll make sure Patricia's confident in the strategy. He left before Rebecca could respond, walking back to the elevator bank with the feeling that he'd just failed another test he didn't know he was taking. The CEO kept offering something that looked like support but felt like a trap, and James had spent too many years surviving to mistake kindness for safety. Emily's surgery was scheduled for December 7th. Dr. Martinez delivered the news Friday afternoon via phone call that James took standing in the parking garage next to his car, the concrete columns making his daughter's future sound like it was echoing from somewhere distant and unavoidable. We'll repair the valve through minimally invasive approach. 3-inch incision, robotically assisted. She'll be in ICU overnight, general floor for 3 days, home by day 5 if recovery proceeds normally. Physical restrictions for 6 weeks post-op, then gradual return to normal activity. Normal activity. As if Emily's normal had ever included running without checking her pulse, playing tag without her hand pressed to her chest, being 7 without the shadow of her mother's death hanging over every milestone. James thanked Dr. Martinez and sat in the Honda with the engine off while October wind rattled leaves across the parking garage floor. December 7th, 8 weeks away. The Morrison bonus wouldn't hit his account until December 15th at the earliest. He'd be covering the surgery cost on payment plans and credit cards, digging the debt hole deeper before the bonuses arrived to fill it back in. Mathematics of survival. He'd become an expert. Saturday morning brought Emily bouncing into his bedroom at 6:30 a.m. with her astronomy book and questions about whether Neptune's storms ever stopped. James made pancakes while she read aloud about wind speeds that would tear Earth apart, her voice bright with the kind of wonder that made his chest hurt in ways the cardiologist couldn't fix. Daddy, can we look at stars tonight with the telescope? She'd gotten the telescope for her 6th birthday, a beginner model that Linda had picked out 3 months before the cancer diagnosis, back when planning 6 months ahead felt reasonable instead of optimistic. If it's clear, absolutely. We'll set up in the backyard after dinner. Emily drew while James cleaned the kitchen, her purple crayons creating galaxies on construction paper. She'd filled 2 notebooks with drawings since Linda died, every page some variation of stars and planets and the occasional stick figure labeled Mom among the purple constellations. His mother had suggested therapy. James had tried it for 6 months, watching Emily sit with a child psychologist who asked about feelings and got answers about black holes. Eventually, the psychologist had said some children process grief through creativity instead of words. And if Emily wanted to draw her mother into the stars, that was healthy enough. James had stopped the sessions and let his daughter paint the universe purple, figuring Linda would appreciate being memorialized in galaxies instead of graveyards. The newest drawing showed 3 figures again: the tall brown man, the small purple girl, and the woman in gray. But this time the woman had a mouth, a small, uncertain curve that wasn't quite a smile but suggested the possibility. "Is this the lady from before?" James pointed to the gray figure. "The one with no smile?" "She has a smile now, a little one, like she's learning how." Emily added stars around the 3 figures. "I think she's lonely, Daddy, like you were after Mommy left before you remembered how to laugh at my jokes." The observation hit harder than it should have. James had forgotten that Emily had been watching him those first terrible months, cataloging his grief while navigating her own. She'd been 3 years old and paying attention to whether her father still knew how to laugh. "I think everyone gets lonely sometimes, sweetheart, but we find ways through it. Like having people who care about us." Emily's crayon moved across the paper with deliberate precision. "The lady in gray needs people who care about her, I can tell." James looked at his daughter, 7 years old and reading emotional landscapes he couldn't map, and wondered what Linda would say about their child's ability to see loneliness in CEOs she'd never met. Probably something about Emily inheriting observation skills from both parents. The combination of Linda's emotional intelligence and James's analytical precision creating a child who saw patterns everywhere. "You're very wise for 7, you know that?" "I know. Grandma says I'm an old soul." Emily held up the finished drawing. "Can we give this to the lady? I think she'd like it." James took the picture, studying the 3 figures with their careful crayon rendering. The lady in gray had a mouth now, that small, uncertain smile, and somehow, Emily had captured something essential about Rebecca Morgan learning to be human again, after cancer had taught her mortality. "Maybe. We'll see." That evening they set up the telescope in the backyard, James helping Emily find Jupiter through the eyepiece while she squealed at the visible bands and the 4 bright points that were Galilean moons. They stayed outside until the October cold drove them in, Emily chattering about how her mom was up there somewhere watching the same stars from a better vantage point. James tucked her into bed at 8:30 p.m., reading 3 chapters about the Mars rovers before her breathing settled into sleep. He stood in her doorway longer than necessary, watching his daughter's chest rise and fall with mechanical regularity, counting heartbeats he couldn't hear but knew were there, working too hard, struggling with a valve that needed surgical intervention in 8 weeks. The cost was $36,000 he'd find somewhere, because the alternative was unthinkable. His phone buzzed at 10:47 p.m., a text from Rebecca Morgan's personal number. "I have a board dinner tomorrow night, mandatory attendance. Kenneth Anderson will be there. He's my ex-fiancé, board member, and he's been making my life difficult since I ended things 2 years ago. I know you said no to being a buffer, and I respect that, but I'm asking again not as your boss, but as someone who's running out of polite ways to say leave me alone. If you're willing, it's 7 p.m. at the Simsbury Inn. No performance required, just presence. I'll understand if the answer is still no." James read the message 3 times. Rebecca Morgan, who ran billion-dollar portfolios in boardroom meetings like military operations, was asking for help dealing with an ex-fiancé who couldn't accept rejection. The request was personal, vulnerable, completely inappropriate for a CEO to ask an employee. It was also honest in a way that Rebecca hadn't been before, stripping away the corporate framing and admitting she needed someone who wouldn't let her be alone with a man making her uncomfortable. Emily's words echoed in his head. The lady in gray needs people who care about her. James typed a response before overthinking could stop him. 7 p.m. The Simsbury Inn. I'll be there, not as your employee, as someone who won't let you fight alone. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Thank you. That means more than you know. Sunday evening brought unseasonable warmth, and James, standing in front of his closet trying to remember the last time he'd dressed for anything nicer than client meetings. The best suit he owned was the charcoal one he wore to work, clean but showing wear at the cuffs. He paired it with a white shirt and the one tie Emily had picked out last Christmas, dark blue with small silver stars that she'd insisted looked like a constellation. His mother agreed to watch Emily overnight with questions in her eyes that James deflected. Work event, networking. The lies came easily because the truth was too complicated. He was having dinner with his CEO to help her avoid her ex-fiancé who sat on the company board, and he was doing it because a 7-year-old had drawn a picture of a lonely woman learning to smile. The Simsbury Inn sat 20 minutes north of Hartford, old money disguised as New England charm. The parking lot held luxury sedans and one Honda Civic that James parked in the back corner, like his car might be contagious. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft lighting and the quiet murmur of people whose problems didn't include medical debt or survival mathematics. Rebecca stood near the bar in a black dress that was elegant without being formal, her hair down for the first time James had seen outside the office. She looked different, softer maybe, or just less armored, like she'd left the CEO performance in her office and brought the actual person to dinner instead. You came. Relief flickered across her face before the professional mask reasserted itself. I said I would. James stopped 3 feet away, maintaining the distance that kept this from being a date, even though everyone in the restaurant would assume otherwise. Kenneth's already here, table in the back with 3 other board members. He's been watching the door. Rebecca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Thank you for this. I know it's asking a lot. You're not asking me to lie. Just to be present, that's something I can do. The hostess led them to a table with a clear view of the room and the perfect sightline to the back corner where 4 men in expensive suits occupied a table that radiated power and entitlement. One of them, mid-40s with silver temples and the smile of someone who'd never been told no, tracked Rebecca's movement across the restaurant with proprietary focus. Kenneth Anderson, ex-fiancé and board member. The man making Rebecca's life difficult. He's staring. James pulled out Rebecca's chair, making the gesture visible and deliberate. He always stares. It's part of the performance. He thinks persistence is romantic instead of exhausting. Rebecca sat with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent 2 years perfecting the art of ignoring attention she didn't want. He proposed 3 years ago. I said yes because it made sense on paper. He was successful, connected, understood the demands of my career. We were engaged for 8 months before I realized I was planning a wedding to someone I didn't particularly like. What made you realize? I got my cancer diagnosis. Rebecca's fingers traced the stem of her water glass. My first thought wasn't to call Kenneth. It was that I didn't want him there, that having him at my appointments would be worse than being alone. That's when I knew I'd made a mistake accepting his proposal. James absorbed this information while the waiter appeared with menus and wine recommendations they both declined. Across the room, Kenneth Anderson was still watching, his attention never wavering even as he nodded at whatever his table mates were discussing. How did he take the breakup? Badly. He spent 6 months trying to convince me I was making an emotional decision, that cancer had compromised my judgment, that we were perfect together on paper so actual feelings were irrelevant. Rebecca's voice remained level, but something sharp lived underneath. He's on the board because his family's investment firm was an early stakeholder. I can't fire him. I can't avoid him. All I can do is keep saying no in increasingly direct language while he keeps reframing my rejection as temporary confusion. The waiter returned. They ordered food. James barely registered while maintaining the appearance of two people having dinner instead of two people staging a strategic defense against unwanted attention. When the waiter left, Kenneth Anderson stood from his table and walked toward them with the confidence of someone who'd never learned the difference between persistence and harassment. "Rebecca, you look beautiful." He said it like they were alone, like James didn't exist 3 feet away at the same table. "Kenneth, I'm having dinner with a colleague. Please respect that." Rebecca's tone could have frozen water. "A colleague? Is that what we're calling it?" Kenneth's eyes flicked to James for the first time, dismissive assessment that lasted 2 seconds before returning to Rebecca like gravity. "Rebecca, we should talk, privately, about the board's concerns regarding your recent strategic decisions. The board can address concerns through proper channels, not through ambush dinners on Sunday evenings." Rebecca's posture didn't change, but something in her stillness suggested coiled tension, fight-or-flight instincts wrapped in professional courtesy. Kenneth reached for the empty chair at their table. James stood. He didn't make it obvious, didn't square up or step forward, just rose to his full height and met Kenneth Anderson's eyes with the kind of calm certainty that said some boundaries weren't negotiable. "With respect, Mr. Anderson, Ms. Morgan made clear she's not interested in private conversation tonight. I'd suggest honoring that." Kenneth's expression shifted through surprise to calculation to something approaching anger, the progression of someone unused to being told no by people he considered beneath him. His gaze traveled from James's face to his off-the-rack suit, to the constellation tie, cataloging details that confirmed whatever hierarchy existed in Kenneth's mind. "And you are?" "James Thompson, senior analyst. Someone who respects that when a woman says no, the conversation ends." James kept his voice level, professional, absolutely clear. "Ms. Morgan is having dinner with a colleague. If the board has concerns, I'm sure they'll be addressed through appropriate channels during business hours. Tonight isn't that." The restaurant had gone quiet in the way spaces do when people sense conflict but can't quite see it yet. Kenneth stood with his hand still on the chair, calculating whether pushing this further would cost more than it gained. James waited, maintaining the calm certainty that he'd be happy to have this conversation in front of everyone if Kenneth wanted to escalate. "We're not finished, Rebecca." Kenneth directed it at her like James had stopped existing again. "The board will be discussing your judgment, all aspects of it." He walked back to his table. Conversations resumed. Rebecca exhaled slowly, control returning to posture that had been tighter than James realized. "That was foolish. He's vindictive when challenged." "Good. Let him be vindictive about me instead of you." James sat back down, adrenaline still running through his system like electricity. "And for the record, standing up to men who can't hear no isn't foolish. It's basic decency." Something in Rebecca's expression cracked, the professional mask slipping enough that James saw the person underneath. Exhausted, grateful, surprised that someone had chosen to stand between her and discomfort without needing to be asked twice. "No one's ever done that before, stood up for me like that." Her voice was quiet, meant only for the space between them. "Then people haven't been paying attention. You're worth standing up for." James said it simply, factually, the same way he'd say the market opened at 9:30 a.m. or Emily had a heart condition. Just truth, delivered without performance. Rebecca looked at him across the table, really looked. seeing something she apparently hadn't expected to find in a senior analyst wearing a Constellation tie and carrying medical debt he couldn't quite afford. The rest of dinner passed in conversation that felt less like corporate small talk and more like actual people discovering they had things worth discussing. Rebecca asked about Emily with genuine interest, listening to stories about purple drawings and astronomy books with the kind of attention that suggested she actually cared about the answers. James asked about her cancer treatment with the careful respect of someone who understood that survival stories were complicated territory, never simple victories or clean defeats. The worst part wasn't the physical side effects. Rebecca pushed food around her plate, eating very little. It was the loneliness. I'd built this perfect career, this controlled life where I didn't need anyone. And then suddenly I needed everything, and there was no one I felt comfortable asking. So I fought it alone. I won alone, and afterward I realized winning alone felt a lot like losing. James understood that particular mathematics. After Linda died, people kept saying I was so strong, that I was handling it so well, that Emily was lucky to have a father who had everything under control, and I'd smile and say thank you, while inside I was drowning. Strength looks a lot like survival when you don't have alternatives. Intent doesn't erase impact. Rebecca echoed his words from their coffee shop conversation, turning them into something shared instead of advice delivered. No, but sometimes surviving is enough. Sometimes keeping yourself and the people you love above water counts as victory, even if it doesn't look like winning. They stayed until the restaurant started closing, until Kenneth and his board members had left with backward glances that suggested this evening would have consequences. The parking lot was cold when they walked out together, October wind carrying the smell of approaching winter. Thank you for tonight. Rebecca stopped next to a silver Mercedes that probably cost more than James earned in 2 years. For coming, for standing up to Kenneth, for treating this like it mattered. It did matter. You matter. James heard himself say it, heard the sincerity that made it more than corporate courtesy. The lady in gray deserves people who care about her. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly. What did you say? Emily draws pictures, lots of pictures, purple stars and planets and sometimes people. She drew you 3 weeks ago without ever meeting you, called you the lady with no smile and said you looked lonely like planets without suns. James pulled the folded construction paper from his jacket pocket, the drawing Emily had insisted he bring. This is the updated version. She said you're learning to smile again. Thought you might want it. Rebecca unfolded the paper with careful hands, studying the 3 crayon figures under their purple stars. The woman in gray had a mouth now, that small, uncertain smile, and somehow a 7-year-old had captured something essential about Rebecca Morgan relearning how to be human. She sees a lot for someone so young. Rebecca's voice was unsteady in a way James had never heard from her. She sees people, really sees them, the way most of us forget how to do. Linda used to say Emily was born paying attention. James took a breath, feeling like he was stepping off a ledge into something with no guaranteed landing. She also said tonight that the lady in gray needs people who care about her. I think Emily might be right about that. And do you? Rebecca looked up from the drawing, meeting his eyes directly. Care about the lady in gray? James could have deflected, could have kept this professional, maintained the boundaries that protected careers and prevented complications. But standing in a parking lot with a woman who'd fought cancer alone because she'd built walls too high to climb, he chose honesty instead. Yes, I do. Not because you're my boss or because you control bonuses I desperately need. Because somewhere in the last month you became someone I think about when I'm not supposed to be thinking about you. Someone who matters in ways that have nothing to do with work. He kept his voice level, honest. That probably breaks every professional boundary that exists. I'm not apologizing for it, but I'm also not asking you to do anything with that information except know it's true. Rebecca stood perfectly still, the drawing in her hands and Hartford's skyline glowing behind her. I think about you too, about Emily, about the life you're building with dignity and determination while carrying weight that would crush most people. I think about how you said no when I asked inappropriately for help, and then said yes when I asked honestly. How you stood up to Kenneth without hesitation. How you're fighting for your daughter with everything you have. She folded the drawing carefully, precisely. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I'm good at strategy and control and keeping people at exactly the right distance. I'm terrible at letting anyone get close. Then we'll figure it out together. Slowly, honestly, without performance or pretending. James took one step closer, close enough that the space between them felt charged with possibility. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I'm also not walking away just because it's complicated. Emily's surgery is complicated, medical debt is complicated, single fatherhood is complicated. I've gotten good at complicated. I don't want this to be an act. Rebecca's words came out like confession, raw and uncertain. I don't want professional courtesy or strategic positioning. I want something real with someone who chooses to be there instead of showing up out of obligation. James understood what she was offering and what she was asking for. The mutual vulnerability of two people deciding that lonely survival wasn't sustainable, even when connection felt risky. Then let's start with real. No performance, no corporate masks, just two people who are both surviving things and maybe finding that survival works better together. He pulled out his phone. Give me your personal number, not the work line, the one you use when you're being Rebecca instead of Ms. Morgan. She recited it. He saved it. The exchange felt more intimate than it should have, like they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. What happens Monday at the office? Rebecca asked. Monday, we're professional. You're the CEO, I'm the analyst. We keep boundaries clear because we both need our jobs and neither of us can afford the scandal if this becomes office gossip. James met her eyes. And after work, after hours, we figure out what this is. Carefully, honestly, without rushing into anything neither of us is ready for. Rebecca nodded slowly. I can do that. I'm good at compartmentalizing. So am I. 4 years of practice. James stepped back, creating the distance that would let them both leave before this became something that required more conversation than a parking lot could hold. Thank you for dinner, and for trusting me enough to ask for help honestly. Thank you for coming, for standing up, for caring about the lady in gray. Rebecca smiled, small and genuine and completely different from the professional expression she wore in boardrooms. Emily's very wise. Don't tell her that. She already knows. James walked to his Honda while Rebecca stood next to her Mercedes, both of them separating into their different worlds while something new and fragile and potentially impossible stretched between them. He drove home through quiet Hartford streets thinking about lines crossed and boundaries maintained and the difference between surviving alone and building something worth surviving for. His phone buzzed at a red light, a text from Rebecca's personal number. I meant what I said. I don't know how to do this, but I want to learn with you. James typed his response carefully, meaning every word. Then we'll learn together, one honest conversation at a time. The week that followed felt like living in two realities simultaneously. At Horizon Capital, James was the senior analyst managing premium accounts with the kind of competence that made Morrison extend their contract through the first quarter, and Patricia Harris send a handwritten note thanking him for the strategy that balanced security with growth. Rebecca was the CEO running board meetings and quarterly projections with the controlled precision that had built her reputation. They passed each other in hallways with professional nods, exchanged emails about account updates with appropriate corporate language, maintained the performance that this was boss and employee, nothing more, nothing complicated. After hours was different. They texted throughout the week, messages that started professional and slipped into personal. Rebecca asked about Emily's latest drawings. James asked about her follow-up oncology appointment. Small exchanges that built a foundation of actually knowing each other instead of performing competence for each other. Wednesday brought Emily's echocardiogram and news that made James's hands shake while maintaining his expression. Dr. Martinez showed him the imaging, explaining in careful medical language that the mitral valve regurgitation had progressed faster than anticipated. Surgery couldn't wait until December 7th. They needed to operate within 3 weeks before Thanksgiving because waiting risked acute heart failure. The revised surgery date was November 20th. 3 weeks away. The Morrison bonus wouldn't hit until December at the earliest. James was looking at $36,000 in surgical costs he'd have to cover on credit cards and payment plans, digging debt that wouldn't get filled in until bonuses arrived weeks after the bills came due. He sat in his car in the hospital parking garage and texted Rebecca before overthinking it. Emily's surgery moved up to November 20th. 3 weeks. I'm managing it. Her response came within minutes. How can I help? James stared at the words, at the offer of help from someone who had the resources to make his problems disappear with a check she'd barely notice. The easy answer was to say yes, to accept charity disguised as support, to let his CEO solve his problems because she cared about him and had the means. But James Thompson had dignity. That dignity was the line separating him from being someone who traded financial security for compromised integrity, who let his personal relationship with his boss become transactional, who proved Kenneth Anderson right about Rebecca's judgment being compromised. He typed his response carefully. Thank you, but I need to handle this myself, not because I don't appreciate the offer, because I need to be able to look Emily in the eye and tell her I took care of her the right way, with my work, my effort, my character, not by asking people for money I didn't earn. 3 dots appeared and disappeared multiple times before Rebecca's response came through. I understand. That's one of the things I admire about you. But James, if you need anything else, anything that isn't money, I'm here. I know. That matters more than you realize. Friday afternoon at 4:37 p.m., James's office phone rang with an internal extension he didn't recognize. Human Resources. Mr. Thompson, this is Sandra Ellis from HR. I need you to come to the 20th floor immediately. It's urgent. The elevator ride up felt longer than it should have, each floor number lighting up with mechanical precision while James's mind cataloged every possible reason HR would summon him urgently on a Friday afternoon. Performance issues, complaints, policy violations, the 1,000 ways a career could end with a conversation behind closed doors. The HR floor was quiet, most staff having left early for the weekend. Sandra Ellis waited outside a conference room with an expression that gave nothing away. Mr. Thompson, please have a seat inside. Director Walsh will be with you shortly. The conference room held a table, 6 chairs, and the particular silence of spaces designed for difficult conversations. James sat facing the door, maintaining posture that suggested confidence he didn't feel while his mind ran through scenarios that ranged from bad to catastrophic. Director Walsh entered 5 minutes later with a manila folder and the efficient sympathy of someone delivering bad news professionally. Behind him walked Kenneth Anderson in a suit that cost more than James's car, his expression carrying satisfaction that made James's stomach drop. Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming. Director Walsh sat across from him while Kenneth remained standing, presence tactical. We've received a formal complaint regarding inappropriate conduct between you and CEO Rebecca Morgan. The complaint alleges that you've been engaging in a personal relationship with Ms. Morgan that creates conflict of interest and potentially compromises her professional judgment. The words landed like physical blows. James's mind raced through implications while maintaining the calm exterior that was the only weapon he had left. Who filed the complaint? That's confidential. However, the allegations include that you accompanied Ms. Morgan to a social dinner last Sunday where you acted inappropriately toward a board member, specifically myself. Kenneth's voice carried the warm satisfaction of someone who'd been planning this move for days. You physically intimidated me when I attempted to have a professional conversation with Ms. Morgan. Multiple witnesses can confirm the encounter. James felt the trap close with mechanical precision. Kenneth had manufactured this perfectly. Used Sunday's dinner where James had stood up for Rebecca as evidence of inappropriate relationship. File the complaint through HR. Force an investigation that would either end James's career or force Rebecca to distance herself publicly to protect the company. Either outcome gave Kenneth what he wanted. James gone and Rebecca isolated again. I attended a dinner with Ms. Morgan at her request as a colleague preventing unwanted attention from someone who couldn't accept her rejection. If that's inappropriate conduct, then maybe the real investigation should focus on why a board member is using his position to harass the CEO. James kept his voice level, factual, letting the words speak for themselves. Kenneth's expression hardened. Harassment is a serious accusation, Mr. Thompson. One you can't substantiate. Can't I? Because I'd be happy to document 2 years of Ms. Morgan saying no in increasingly direct language while you've reframed her rejection as temporary confusion. I'd be happy to discuss how you've used board dinners as opportunities to corner her privately. How you've made her professional life difficult because she ended a personal relationship that was making her miserable. James stood, maintaining the dignity that was his last defense. But something tells me you don't want that investigation. You just want me gone so Rebecca doesn't have anyone standing between you and whatever delusion you're nursing about reconciliation. Mr. Thompson, I'd advise you to watch your tone. Director Walsh's voice carried warning. These are serious allegations on both sides. Then investigate seriously, talk to Ms. Morgan, review the timeline of events. Check whether Mr. Anderson has a history of complaints from other female executives who've rejected his attention. James moved toward the door, done with this performance. But while you're investigating, I'm suspended from my accounts, aren't I? That's how this works. Accusations get made, targets get sidelined pending investigation, and by the time the truth comes out, the damage is already done. Director Walsh had the grace to look uncomfortable. You'll be on administrative leave pending investigation. Your accounts will be temporarily reassigned. This is standard procedure for complaints of this nature. Of course it is. James opened the door, stopped, turned back. One more thing, Mr. Anderson. You said you wanted to have a professional conversation with Ms. Morgan on Sunday, but professional conversations happen during business hours through proper channels, not at social dinners where you ambush someone who's made clear they want nothing to do with you. Maybe learn that difference before filing complaints about other people's conduct. He left before Kenneth could respond, walking past Sandra Ellis and into the elevator with the feeling that his career had just ended in a 20th floor conference room because he'd chosen to stand up for someone who needed someone standing. The elevator descended. James pulled out his phone and texted Rebecca from inside the moving car. Kenneth filed an HR complaint. I'm on administrative leave pending investigation. Morrison and Westbrook are being reassigned. I'm sorry this is happening. But I'm not sorry I stood up for you. Her response came before the elevator reached the ground floor. I'm fixing this. I'll resign if I have to. I won't let him destroy you for helping me. James typed his reply with shaking hands. Don't you dare resign. Don't give him that satisfaction. We do this the right way, with truth, with evidence, with every professional boundary I should have maintained and didn't because I chose you over my career. I'd make that same choice again. The elevator doors opened. James walked through the lobby and into the parking garage where his Honda waited like a faithful friend that never asked questions it didn't want answered. He sat behind the wheel and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Administrative leave. Accounts reassigned, investigation pending. Kenneth Anderson using corporate machinery to punish James for the crime of caring about Rebecca Morgan and having the audacity to stand between them. The Morrison bonus was gone. The Westbrook account was gone. The $66,000 that was supposed to cover Emily's surgery and pay down debt had just evaporated like morning fog burned off by the ruthless sun of Kenneth Anderson's vindictive precision. James had 3 weeks before his daughter's heart surgery and zero way to pay for it. Except credit cards that would bury him in interest he couldn't service and payment plans that would extend his debt decades into a future he couldn't see past next month. He'd maintained his dignity. He'd stood up for someone who needed someone standing. He'd chosen truth over performance and integrity over security. And now he was going to pay the full price for those choices while Kenneth Anderson celebrated victory and Rebecca Morgan tried to fix damage that couldn't be fixed without compromising everything both of them had worked to build. James started the car and drove home to his daughter, who was drawing purple stars and asking questions about whether her surgery would hurt, and trusting her father to have answers he didn't possess. The mathematics of survival had just gotten exponentially harder. James sat in his apartment Friday night while Emily slept down the hall. Her breathing steady through the baby monitor he still kept plugged in, even though she was 7, because some fears outlived their practical purpose. The stack of financial documents spread across his kitchen table told a story written in numbers that didn't add up to survival. $4,217 in savings, $83,000 in existing medical debt, $36,000 in upcoming surgical costs, zero income until HR concluded their investigation. The credit card applications he'd printed felt like admissions of defeat. 29% APR. $36,000 in debt serviced at that rate would cost him nearly $11,000 in interest the first year alone, turning Emily's surgery into a decade-long financial sentence he'd serve while trying to maintain the performance that everything was under control. His phone buzzed, Rebecca calling instead of texting. "Don't say anything until I finish." Her voice carried the controlled urgency of someone who'd been planning this conversation carefully. "I reviewed the HR complaint. Kenneth's allegations are thin. He's claiming inappropriate relationship based on one dinner where you accompanied me as a colleague. That's not grounds for termination. It's barely grounds for investigation. He's not trying to get me fired. He's trying to isolate you again." James kept his voice low, conscious of Emily sleeping 30 feet away. "Remove me from your life so you don't have anyone standing between you and his delusion about reconciliation." Then he's underestimating how vindictive I can be when someone threatens people I care about. The steel in Rebecca's tone reminded James why she'd built a career on being tougher than everyone else in the room. "I've been reviewing Morrison account files tonight, all of them. Every transaction Jackson handled before you took over." James's analytical mind caught up with what she wasn't saying directly. "You think Kenneth's involved somehow?" Kenneth's family investment firm, Anderson Capital, has holdings in 17 companies that appear in Morrison's portfolio. Jackson's strategy recommendations consistently favored those holdings even when better options existed. The pattern's subtle, but it's there. Someone was steering Morrison's investments toward Anderson Capital's interests. That's a conflict of interest that makes our dinner look like nothing. The implications unfurled like a roadmap. Kenneth had been using Morrison's account to benefit his own firm's holdings. Jackson had been the instrument, whether knowing or unwitting. James had disrupted that arrangement by restructuring the portfolio based on actual strategic analysis instead of hidden kickbacks. You can't prove that without access to Anderson Capital's internal communications. And even if you could, bringing this to the board means accusing Kenneth of financial misconduct. That's a declaration of war. James understood corporate politics well enough to know that CEOs who went after board members with corruption allegations either won completely or lost everything. "I know. which is why I need you to help me prove it. Review every Morrison transaction from the past 18 months. Find the pattern, document the conflict, build the case we need to bury Kenneth Anderson so thoroughly he never threatens either of us again. Rebecca's voice shifted from steel to something softer. I'm not asking as your CEO. I'm asking as someone who's tired of fighting alone and finally found a person worth fighting beside. James looked at the financial documents spread across his table, at the mathematics of survival that had just gotten impossibly harder. He could spend the weekend building a case against Kenneth Anderson that might end the investigation and restore his accounts. Or he could spend those hours figuring out how to finance Emily's surgery through credit cards and payment plans that would destroy his financial future. The choice shouldn't have been difficult. Emily's surgery was in 3 weeks. Kenneth's corruption could wait. But James understood something fundamental about survival. Sometimes the only way through a crisis was to attack the source, instead of managing symptoms. Kenneth had manufactured this HR complaint to remove James from Rebecca's life. As long as Kenneth remained on the board with power over James's career, there would be more complaints, more investigations, more mechanisms of control designed to isolate Rebecca and punish anyone who stood in Kenneth's way. The only path forward was through Kenneth's defeat. Everything else was just delayed drowning. Send me the files, I'll start tonight. James heard himself commit to the harder path, the one that required faith that truth would matter more than timing. Thank you. Rebecca's relief was audible. James, I know this is asking you to trust that the bonuses will still be there when this ends, that the accounts will be reinstated, that fighting this fight won't cost you everything. I'm not doing this for bonuses. I'm doing it because Kenneth Anderson thinks he can destroy people's careers when they don't give him what he wants. That's not a world I want Emily growing up in. James stood, walking to the window where Hartford's lights spread across the darkness. And I'm doing it because the lady in gray deserves someone who fights for her instead of walking away when it gets hard. The encrypted files arrived in his email 20 minutes later. James spent Friday night and all day Saturday deep in spreadsheets and transaction records, building a timeline that showed 18 months of Morrison's investments consistently favoring companies where Anderson Capital held significant stakes. The pattern was subtle enough that casual review wouldn't catch it, but sustained analysis revealed systematic bias that couldn't be coincidental. Jackson had been recommending stocks that benefited Kenneth's firm, regardless of whether they were optimal for Morrison's portfolio. Some recommendations had been good investments that happened to align with Anderson Capital's interests. Others had underperformed the market while still generating returns for Kenneth's holdings through increased valuations driven by Morrison's large purchases. It was elegant corruption, the kind that required forensic accounting to prove because individual transactions looked legitimate, even while the aggregate pattern revealed manipulation. By Sunday morning, James had documentation showing 37 separate instances where Morrison's portfolio moves had directly benefited Anderson Capital. The total value to Kenneth's firm exceeded $12 million over 18 months. That wasn't enough to prove criminal conduct, but it was more than enough to demonstrate conflict of interest that violated Horizon Capital's ethics policies and Kenneth's fiduciary duty to the board. James sent his analysis to Rebecca at 11 a.m. Sunday, with a cover memo outlining the evidence and recommendations for next steps. Then he drove to his mother's house to pick up Emily, who'd spent the weekend drawing purple galaxies and asking whether her surgery meant she'd have a robot heart like in her science fiction books. Just a repaired heart, sweetheart. They fixed the valve so it works properly again. James buckled her into the back seat, studying her face for signs of fear or anxiety. Will it hurt? Emily's eyes were Linda's eyes, dark and direct and seeing more than he wanted her to see. You'll be asleep during the surgery. Afterward, it might hurt for a few days, but the doctors will give you medicine to help, and I'll be right there the whole time. James kept his voice steady, certain. because children needed fathers who had answers even when those answers were only half true. "Okay, can I bring my telescope to the hospital? I want to show the nurses Saturn's rings." Emily's ability to find wonder in crisis never stopped surprising him. "We'll figure something out. Maybe we can set up a tablet with astronomy images instead of bringing the whole telescope." They drove home while Emily narrated stories about the purple drawings she'd made for Grandma. Elaborate galaxies where her mother lived among stars that never stopped burning. James listened and responded and maintained the performance that everything was manageable while his mind calculated surgical costs against credit limits, against the growing possibility that Kenneth's defeat might come too late to save James's financial future. Monday morning brought an email from Director Walsh requesting James's presence at the HR office at 2 p.m. for a follow-up interview regarding the complaint. No details, no indication whether this was good news or the formal beginning of his termination process. James spent the morning reviewing Morrison files again, looking for anything he'd missed, any additional evidence that might strengthen the case against Kenneth. At 1:45 p.m., he walked into Horizon Capital's lobby wearing his best suit and the Constellation tie Emily had picked out, armor disguised as professional courtesy. The 20th floor conference room held Director Walsh, Sandra Ellis, and unexpectedly Patricia Harris from the board. No Kenneth. That absence felt significant. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming." Director Walsh gestured to a chair across from the three of them. "We've been reviewing the allegations filed by Mr. Anderson. We've also received additional information from CEO Morgan regarding potential conflicts of interest in the Morrison account management under your predecessor." Patricia Harris leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed your analysis of the Morrison account transactions. The pattern you've documented raises serious questions about Mr. Anderson's conduct. However, I need to understand your timeline. You've been managing this account for less than a month. How did you identify systematic bias that presumably existed before you took over?" James chose his words carefully. Truth was the only weapon that couldn't be used against him. "When I restructured Morrison's portfolio, I reviewed 18 months of transaction history to understand the existing strategy. I noticed recurring patterns where investments favored companies with Anderson Capital holdings, regardless of comparative performance metrics. Initially, I assumed it was coincidental, but the frequency and consistency suggested systematic bias. I documented 37 instances where Morrison's portfolio moves directly benefited Anderson Capital holdings. That's not casual correlation, that's conflict of interest." "And you brought this to CEO Morgan when?" Patricia's eyes were sharp, calculating. "Friday evening, after Mr. Anderson filed the HR complaint alleging inappropriate relationship between Ms. Morgan and myself. I wanted her to understand that Kenneth's complaint might be retaliation for my restructuring of an account he'd been using to benefit his own firm." "That's a serious accusation." Director Walsh's tone carried warning. "It's a documented pattern supported by 18 months of transaction records. If it's inaccurate, the data will prove me wrong. If it's accurate, then this entire HR investigation is retaliation designed to remove me from an account I restructured away from Kenneth's interests." James met Patricia's eyes directly. "Either way, truth wins. I'm comfortable letting the evidence speak." Patricia studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Thompson, you understand that if your allegations against Mr. Anderson prove false, you've just ended your career at this firm and possibly in this industry. Accusing a board member of corruption isn't something you recover from gracefully." "I understand, but I'd rather end my career standing up for what's right than keep it by staying silent about what's wrong." James kept his voice level, meaning every word. "My daughter needs surgery in 3 weeks. I'm carrying debt I can barely service. The bonuses from these accounts could change my family's financial future, but none of that matters if I compromise my integrity to keep it. I have dignity. That's worth more than security bought through silence." Something shifted in Patricia's expression. Respect maybe, or recognition that James Thompson wasn't performing courage. He was living it. Director Walsh, I need to confer with the board regarding Mr. Anderson's position and these allegations. In the meantime, I'm recommending we suspend the HR investigation pending our review of the Morrison account irregularities. Patricia stood, gathering files with decisive efficiency. Mr. Thompson, you'll remain on administrative leave until we conclude our investigation. However, I want you to know that your willingness to document potential corruption despite personal cost reflects exactly the kind of character this firm needs. She left. Director Walsh and Sandra Ellis followed with expressions suggesting this meeting had gone directions they hadn't anticipated. James sat alone in the conference room for a moment, processing what had just happened. He'd accused a board member of systematic corruption. Patricia Harris, one of the most powerful board members at Horizon Capital, had just endorsed investigating those accusations instead of dismissing them. Kenneth's retaliation had backfired, turning James from target into witness and Kenneth from accuser into subject. But James was still on administrative leave, still without income, still 3 weeks from surgery he couldn't afford. Victory in corporate politics didn't pay hospital bills or fix heart valves. His phone buzzed. Rebecca texting from her office 5 floors above. Patricia just called. The board's convening emergency session Wednesday to review Kenneth's conduct. You did it. You're going to win this. James typed his response carefully. Winning this doesn't solve my actual problem. Emily's surgery is November 20th. Today is October 28th. I have 3 weeks and 0 income to finance $36,000 in costs. Kenneth losing his board seat doesn't change that timeline. Rebecca's response took longer this time. Can we talk? Tonight, after you put Emily to bed. My place, not about work, about something I should have said weeks ago. James stared at the message, understanding that whatever conversation Rebecca wanted to have wasn't going to be simple or safe or easily categorized as professional versus personal. 9 p.m. I'll be there. He spent the afternoon with Emily, helping her with homework about fractions while his mind calculated different fractions. 3 weeks divided by 0 income equaled impossible. 36,000 divided by 4,000 in savings equaled drowning. The mathematics of survival kept producing answers that didn't include victory. Emily went to bed at 8:30 p.m. after stories about Mars rovers and questions about whether her surgery would make her heart stronger or just fixed. James promised stronger, hoping truth would catch up with the lie eventually, then drove to Rebecca's downtown condominium while Hartford's Monday evening traffic thinned toward quiet. Rebecca opened the door in jeans and a sweater, hair down, no professional armor. Just the person underneath offering entrance to spaces she rarely let anyone see. Thank you for coming. She stepped aside, letting him into the apartment that was both exactly what he'd expected and nothing like it. Minimalist furniture, yes. Floor-to-ceiling windows with city views, yes. But also books everywhere. Philosophy and poetry and history stacked on every surface. A telescope by the window pointed toward stars that downtown light pollution mostly obscured. Framed photographs of mountains and coastlines, places that suggested Rebecca had a life beyond boardrooms even if she rarely acknowledged it. Your place is beautiful. James meant it. The space felt lived in instead of staged, personal instead of performative. It's where I come to not be the CEO. To remember I'm a person who likes things beyond quarterly reports and market projections. Rebecca walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of wine without asking if he wanted any. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting until I'm finished, because if you interrupt, I'll lose my nerve. James took the offered wine and sat on the couch that faced those floor-to-ceiling windows. Rebecca remained standing, silhouetted against the city lights like she was gathering strength from the view. When I was diagnosed with cancer, my first thought wasn't fear. It was relief. Her voice was quiet but steady. Relief that I finally had a legitimate excuse to end my engagement to Kenneth. Relief that I could say I need to focus on treatment instead of admitting I'd agreed to marry someone I didn't love. Because it made sense on paper. I used cancer as an excuse to avoid honest conversations about what I actually wanted. She turned to face him. After treatment ended and I was officially in remission, I told myself I'd build a different kind of life. One with room for actual relationships instead of strategic partnerships, but I didn't know how. I'd spent 20 years being the CEO, being the woman who sacrificed personal life for professional success, being the person everyone admired and no one really knew. And then you showed up. You with your dignity and your daughter and your refusal to compromise integrity even when it cost you everything. You showed me what real courage looks like, not cancer survival or corporate success. Just a man choosing truth over safety every single time. Rebecca set down her wine glass and crossed to where James sat. I'm falling in love with you. Not carefully or strategically or in any way that makes sense given our professional relationship and your financial crisis and the timing that couldn't be worse, but I am. And I needed you to know that before I do what I'm about to do. James felt his heart rate spike, medical training making him aware of his pulse in ways most people never noticed. What are you about to do? I'm writing you a check for $36,000 to cover Emily's surgery. And before you refuse on principle about dignity and earning things yourself, I need you to understand this isn't charity. It's not pity. It's not me trying to buy your affection or compromise your integrity. Rebecca's hands were shaking slightly, the only visible sign that this conversation was costing her something. It's me refusing to let the woman I love lose her father because he was too proud to accept help from someone who can afford to give it. It's me honoring what Linda would want, which is Emily taken care of regardless of mathematics that don't add up. Rebecca, I can't. Say it again. Her voice cut through his objection with sudden steel. James stopped, confused. What? Say it again. The thing you were about to say, but look at me when you say it. Really look at me. Rebecca's eyes held his with intensity that made looking away impossible. And tell me honestly whether your refusal is about dignity or about fear. James met her gaze, feeling the weight of the question. Was this about maintaining integrity? Or was it about being too afraid to accept that someone might actually care enough to help without expecting anything in return? That Linda's death hadn't used up his lifetime allocation of being loved? I don't want Emily's surgery to become debt I owe you, financially or emotionally. The truth came out raw, uncertain. I don't want us built on transactions where I'm the one who needed saving. Then don't make it a transaction. Make it a gift. Make it someone who loves you refusing to watch you drown when she has the life raft. Rebecca sat beside him on the couch, close enough that he could feel her trembling. James, I have more money than I'll ever spend. The cancer treatment cost me nearly $200,000 out of pocket and I barely noticed. I can write a check for $36,000 the same way you'd buy coffee. It's nothing to me financially, but it's everything to you and Emily. Why would I have resources and watch you struggle when I can simply choose to help? Because accepting help feels like admitting I can't take care of my daughter myself. James heard the words and recognized the pride that had been slowly killing him for 4 years. You have been taking care of her, perfectly, heroically. But James, taking care of Emily doesn't mean refusing every form of support that might make that care sustainable. It means doing what's best for her, even if that includes letting someone help. Rebecca took his hand, her grip warm and certain. Linda told you to take care of your girl. I don't think she meant you had to do it completely alone until it destroyed you. I think she meant build a life where Emily has everything she needs, including a father who's still standing when she grows up. The logic was sound. The offer was genuine. Rebecca had the resources and the motivation, and she was right that $36,000 meant different things to different people. To her, it was rounding error. To him, it was the difference between Emily's surgery happening on schedule or being delayed until James could cobble together financing through credit cards that would cost him years of interest payments. But accepting still felt like crossing a line he'd drawn at Linda's deathbed. Like admitting he wasn't enough alone, like taking something he hadn't earned through his own work and competence. I need you to understand something. James kept his hand in hers but met her eyes directly. If I accept this, it can't change what we are to each other. I won't let financial help become emotional debt. I won't spend the rest of our relationship wondering if you stayed with me because you invested in Emily's health. And I won't let you wonder if I stayed because I owed you something I could never repay. Then we agree now that this is a gift, no strings, no debt, no obligation beyond what we'd choose anyway. Rebecca's voice was absolutely certain. You don't owe me anything except honesty. About how you feel, about what you need, about whether you're falling in love with me too or if I'm alone in this. James looked at the woman beside him, the CEO who'd fought cancer alone and built walls so high she'd convinced herself they were protection instead of prison, who'd asked him for help being human again and somehow trusted him enough to be vulnerable when vulnerability had nearly killed her before, who was offering him the exact help he needed while simultaneously terrifying him with feelings he hadn't felt since Linda died. I'm falling in love with you too. The words came out quieter than he intended, but solid as truth. I've been falling since you asked me to drive you to chemotherapy appointments that never happened because you were already in remission. Since you gave me the Morrison account when you could have given it to anyone. Since you respected my no and then asked again honestly. I'm falling in love with you and it terrifies me because the last woman I loved died and left me alone with a 3-year-old who needed more than I knew how to give. Rebecca's eyes glistened with tears she didn't let fall. I'm terrified too. I told myself after Kenneth that I was done with relationships, that I'd survived cancer without needing anyone, and that proved I was better off alone. But you made me want connection again. Made me remember that survival isn't the same as living. She squeezed his hand. So let's be terrified together. Let's accept that this is complicated and messy and probably violates every corporate policy that exists. And let's do it anyway because the alternative is going back to careful loneliness and I'm done with that. James pulled her close, feeling her warmth against him, her heartbeat steady under his palm. I'll accept your help with Emily's surgery, not because I like needing help, but because you're right that taking care of my daughter means doing what's best for her. And Emily healthy and on schedule is better than Emily delayed because her father was too proud to accept a gift. Thank you. Rebecca's whisper was muffled against his shoulder. Thank you for letting me do this, for trusting me enough to help. They sat together while Hartford's Monday night settled into Tuesday's early hours. Two people who'd been surviving alone, discovering that survival worked better together. Eventually, Rebecca wrote the check with hands that shook slightly. $36,000 in careful script that would cover Emily's surgery and maybe, possibly begin building something between them that looked less like transaction and more like partnership. James folded the check into his wallet next to the insurance card and Emily's school photo, tangible proof that the mathematics of survival had just shifted in his favor. The debt would still exist. The bonuses were still uncertain. Kenneth Anderson still sat on the board and might survive the investigation if Patricia Harris couldn't prove corruption conclusively. But Emily's surgery was covered. That was victory enough for tonight. Wednesday's emergency board session happened behind closed doors on the 23rd floor while James waited in his apartment with Emily, helping her practice multiplication tables and trying not to check his phone every 3 minutes. Rebecca had texted at 8 a.m. that the meeting was starting. Nothing since then. At 2:47 p.m., his phone finally buzzed. Kenneth's resigned from the board effective immediately. Patricia presented the Morrison account evidence to the full board. Kenneth tried to claim Jackson had acted independently but couldn't explain the pattern. Rather than face formal investigation, he resigned. You were right. Truth won. James read the message 3 times, feeling victory land with less satisfaction than he'd expected. Kenneth Anderson was gone, yes. The HR investigation would be dropped. James's accounts would be reinstated. The bonuses would come through. But Kenneth's resignation didn't undo the 2 years of harassment Rebecca had endured, didn't compensate for the careers of people who'd challenged him before and lost, didn't fundamentally change a system where powerful men could manipulate corporate machinery to punish people who said no, until someone finally had enough evidence to force accountability. Kenneth had lost his board seat. He'd faced no criminal charges, no professional consequences beyond losing one position while maintaining his family's investment firm and all the wealth and power that came with it. He'd survived this like powerful men always survived, landing somewhere else where his money mattered more than his conduct. Still, he was gone, and Rebecca was safe from his particular brand of persistent delusion disguised as romance. James texted back, "Good. You're safe now. That's what matters." Rebecca's response came quickly. "No, what matters is we're both safe now. Come to my office. 5 p.m. There's someone who wants to meet you." The someone turned out to be Patricia Harris herself, sitting in Rebecca's office with tea and an expression that suggested she'd been waiting for this conversation specifically. Rebecca stood by the window, professional armor back in place, but her eyes found James's with warmth that wasn't strictly corporate. "Mr. Thompson, please sit." Patricia gestured to the chair across from her. "I wanted to thank you personally for bringing the Morrison account irregularities to our attention. Kenneth Anderson's resignation protects this firm from what could have been catastrophic scandal if his conduct had continued unchecked. I'm glad the evidence was sufficient." James kept his tone neutral, professional, appropriate for speaking with a board member, even though the last week had burned through most of his remaining patience for corporate courtesy. "More than sufficient. We've initiated forensic audit of all accounts Jackson managed during his tenure. The pattern extends beyond Morrison. Kenneth's firm benefited from systematically biased recommendations across multiple portfolios totaling approximately $43 million in improper advantage." Patricia's expression hardened. "That's fraud." Kenneth resigned to avoid formal charges, but our audit findings will be shared with relevant regulatory authorities. His investment firm will face scrutiny that may well destroy it. Real consequences, then. Not just resignation, but the kind of investigation that ended careers and closed firms. Kenneth Anderson had manipulated the system for years, and James's documentation had finally provided the thread that unraveled the entire scheme. "I'm sorry Jackson was caught in this. He's a good analyst who probably didn't realize he was being used." James meant it. Jackson had left for Boston before any of this exploded, probably never knowing his strategy recommendations had been serving Kenneth's interests instead of clients. "Jackson is being recalled for interview. If he participated knowingly, he'll face consequences. If he was an unwitting instrument, he'll have opportunity to explain." Patricia stood, gathering her files. "Mr. Thompson, your administrative leave is concluded effective immediately. Your accounts are reinstated, and the board has voted to promote you to VP of Strategic Accounts. Effective December 1st. The position comes with base salary increase to $175,000 annually plus expanded bonus structure. You've earned it." The numbers landed like physical things. VP of Strategic Accounts. $175,000 base salary. That was nearly double his current income. That was financial breathing room he hadn't imagined possible 6 months ago. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." James actually didn't, shock overwhelming his usual verbal precision. "Say you'll keep being exactly who you've shown yourself to be. Honest, competent, willing to stand up for what's right even when it costs you." Patricia walked to the door, paused. Rebecca, you've chosen well. Mr. Thompson reflects credit on your judgment. The board approves. She left. The office fell into weighted silence. James looked at Rebecca, who was smiling with tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The board approves. Rebecca laughed, shaky and relieved. Patricia Harris just gave us explicit permission to date publicly. Do you understand what that means? No more hiding. No more pretending this is just professional. We can actually be together without corporate machinery trying to destroy one of us. James stood, crossed to where Rebecca remained by the window, pulled her close. We can be together, officially. With the board's blessing and Kenneth's resignation and a VP promotion, that means Emily's future is secure. We won completely. You won. You're the one who found the evidence, who stood up to Kenneth, who refused to compromise integrity even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Rebecca's arms wrapped around him with certainty that felt like coming home. I just fell in love with someone brave enough to show me what courage actually looks like. They stood together in her office while Wednesday afternoon faded toward evening. Two people who'd been fighting alone, discovering that victory felt better shared. Eventually, Rebecca pulled back slightly, her expression turning serious. There's one more thing. Emily's surgery, November 20th. I want to be there. She rushed the words like she expected resistance. Not as your boss or your girlfriend or anything official, just as someone who cares about both of you and doesn't want you sitting in that waiting room alone, counting heartbeats like I counted chemotherapy drips. James felt something in his chest crack open, letting in light he'd been blocking since Linda died. I'd like that. Emily would like that too. She calls you the lady learning to smile now. Says you're part of our family in the purple drawings. She draws me in purple? Rebecca's voice broke slightly. Linda's favorite color. Emily draws everyone she loves in purple. You're in the latest galaxy between me and a rendering of her mom among the stars. Your family now according to a 7-year-old's crayon cosmology. James smiled despite the tears he felt threatening. Fair warning. Emily takes her cosmology very seriously. Then I'll honor it with appropriate seriousness. Rebecca kissed him, soft and certain and absolutely real. We should tell her together. About us. About the fact that the lady learning to smile is staying. They drove to James's mother's house that evening to pick up Emily, who'd spent the afternoon drawing more purple galaxies and asking Grandma whether robot hearts beeped. In the car on the way home, James glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Remember the lady with no smile? The one you've been drawing? The lady learning to smile. She has a smile now, Daddy, I told you. Emily's voice carried the patience of someone explaining obvious things to adults who paid insufficient attention. Right. Well, she's going to be spending more time with us. She's going to be at your surgery and she's going to be part of our family if that's okay with you. Emily considered this with the seriousness she brought to astronomy and fractions and other topics that mattered. Is she going to be like a mom? Or like a friend? Or like something else? James chose his words carefully. Something else. She's not replacing your mom. Nobody could do that. But she loves us both and wants to be part of our life. What do you think about that? I think Mommy would like her. Emily's answer was immediate, certain. Mommy told me before she left that you'd find someone else eventually, and that was okay. That love doesn't run out. It multiplies like stars. So if the lady learning to smile makes you happy and she's nice to me and she doesn't try to make me stop drawing Mommy in purple, then I think she's supposed to be here. James blinked hard against tears while Rebecca, sitting in the passenger seat, made a sound that might have been laughter or crying or both. Linda had told Emily that, had prepared their daughter for the possibility that James might find love again, had given permission wrapped in astronomical metaphor that a 3-year-old had carried for 4 years until the moment it became relevant. She won't make you stop drawing anything. She has a telescope too. Maybe you can teach her about the stars? James managed to keep his voice mostly steady. Okay, can she come to dinner tomorrow? I want to show her my Mars rover book. Emily had already moved on, accepting this change with the adaptability of childhood while James and Rebecca were still processing the weight of it. She can come to dinner. Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. I'd love to see your Mars rover book. November 20th arrived with snow that Hartford's forecasters had promised wouldn't come until December. Emily was admitted to Connecticut Children's Hospital at 6 a.m., chattering nervously about whether the surgery robot had a name and whether the doctors would let her keep her purple blanket during the operation. The surgical team had the patience of people who'd heard every childhood question about medical procedures and learned to answer honestly without inducing terror. James held Emily's hand while the anesthesiologist explained the mask that would make her sleep, how it would smell funny but only for a second before everything went quiet and soft. Emily looked at her father with trust that nearly broke him. You'll be here when I wake up. Her voice was small, younger than 7, carrying the fear she'd been too brave to show until this moment. Right here, I promise. When you wake up, the first person you'll see is me, and Rebecca will be here too, and Grandma's in the waiting room. You're surrounded by people who love you. James kept his voice steady, certain, giving her the anchor she needed. Okay, tell the lady learning to smile that she can see my new heart after. It's going to be all fixed and strong. Emily's eyes were already getting heavy as the pre-medication took effect. Tell Mommy I was brave. You're the bravest person I know, sweetheart. Mommy already knows. James kissed her forehead while the surgical team prepared to wheel her into the operating room, where doctors would open his daughter's chest and repair the valve that had been struggling since before Linda died. The surgery took 4 hours. James spent them in the waiting room with Rebecca on one side and his mother on the other. 3 people united in the particular helplessness of loving someone undergoing surgery you couldn't control or influence. Rebecca held his hand the entire time, steady pressure that reminded him he wasn't fighting alone anymore. At 12:43 p.m., Dr. Martinez appeared in surgical scrubs with the expression that meant good news. The repair was successful. Minimal regurgitation now. Emily's heart is functioning properly. She'll be in recovery for another hour, then we'll move her to ICU for overnight monitoring. Barring complications, she'll be on the general floor by tomorrow afternoon and home by Friday. James felt Rebecca's hand tighten around his, while his mother made a sound of relief that came from somewhere deep and grateful. Emily was okay. The surgery had worked. His daughter's heart was fixed. Can I see her? James was already standing before Dr. Martinez finished nodding. Recovery in 45 minutes. I'll have the nurse come get you. The 45 minutes felt eternal and instantaneous simultaneously. When the nurse finally called his name, James walked into recovery where Emily lay small and pale in a bed surrounded by monitors that beeped with mechanical reassurance. Her eyes opened when he took her hand, unfocused but present. Hi, sweetheart. You did so good. The surgery worked perfectly. James's voice broke, but he didn't care. Daddy. Emily's word was slurred with anesthesia. Did you tell the lady learning to smile she could see my heart? I'll tell her right now. James looked up to find Rebecca standing in the doorway, having convinced the nurses to let her in despite family-only rules. I'm here, Emily. Your heart is beautiful and fixed and so strong. Rebecca's voice was thick with tears she wasn't bothering to hide. And you're the bravest girl I've ever met. Emily smiled, that gap-toothed smile Linda had loved, and fell back into medicated sleep while the monitors tracked her heartbeat at steady, healthy, normal rates. 18 months later, James Thompson stood in his backyard in West Hartford, watching his daughter teach Rebecca how to find Mars through the telescope Emily had convinced them both to upgrade. They'd moved 3 months ago into a house with enough space for Emily's expanding astronomy book collection and Rebecca's philosophy volumes and the life they were building together in the spaces between work and family, and the thousand small moments that added up to partnership. Emily was 9 now, healthy enough that the cardiologist had cleared her for full activity, including the soccer team she'd joined with enthusiasm that surprised everyone except Rebecca, who'd apparently played midfield in college and taught Emily footwork drills in their driveway. James had been VP of Strategic Accounts for a year, managing a portfolio that included Morrison and Patricia Harris and 7 other high-value clients who trusted his analysis because he'd proven that competence and integrity weren't mutually exclusive. The bonuses had been substantial. The debt was manageable. The savings account had actual savings instead of emergency funds perpetually one crisis away from depletion. Rebecca remained CEO of Horizon Capital, though she'd restructured her schedule to include actual evenings and weekends, revolutionary concepts that her board had accepted with surprising support after Patricia Harris had pointed out that balanced executives made better long-term decisions. She and James maintained professional boundaries at work that fooled absolutely no one but satisfied corporate requirements about disclosure and appropriate conduct. Evenings and weekends belonged to the family they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. Dinners where Emily dominated conversation with astronomy facts and soccer strategies. Weekend mornings where Rebecca made pancakes that were only slightly better than James's attempts. Quiet moments after Emily went to bed when 2 people who'd survived separate loneliness could sit together and appreciate the mathematics of love, which somehow added up to more than the sum of its parts. Emily's drawings had evolved. The purple galaxies remained, Linda's memory honored in crayon constellations that covered Emily's bedroom walls. But now the drawings included 3 figures consistently: the tall brown man, the small purple girl growing taller each month, and the woman in gray who smiled more easily, learning what Emily had known all along about the difference between loneliness and solitude. "Daddy, Rebecca, I can see the polar ice caps!" Emily's shout carried across the October evening with the kind of joy that made everything they'd survived worthwhile. James walked to the telescope, wrapping an arm around Rebecca's waist while they watched his daughter explore the cosmos with the fearlessness of someone who'd survived heart surgery and carried her mother's memory among the Linda would have loved this, he thought. Would have loved seeing Emily healthy and happy and teaching someone else about the universe's wonders. Would have loved Rebecca, who'd learned to be human again by loving a family that needed exactly the kind of careful courage she'd spent years perfecting. "What are you thinking about?" Rebecca's question was soft, private, meant only for him. That love doesn't run out. It multiplies like stars. James repeated Emily's words from 18 months ago, Linda's wisdom delivered through their daughter. That we built something good from the wreckage, that surviving alone is possible, but surviving together is better. Rebecca leaned into him, solid and warm and absolutely present. "I'm glad we were both brave enough to try." Across the yard, Emily adjusted the telescope's focus, searching for Saturn's rings or Jupiter's moons or whatever celestial wonder called to her tonight. Above them, stars wheeled through Hartford's light-polluted sky, infinite and patient and burning with the kind of steady certainty that James had learned to trust again. The mathematics of survival had taught him that some equations didn't solve cleanly. That debt and loss and fear couldn't always be managed through competence and determination alone. That sometimes the bravest thing was accepting help from someone who chose to stand beside you instead of watching you drown from so distance. But the mathematics of love operated differently. Addition that became multiplication. Individual strengths that combined into partnerships stronger than either person alone. 2 people who'd been lonely learning that chosen family could honor what came before while building something new. James Thompson had made Linda a promise 4 years ago in a hospice room. Take care of our girl, show her what good men do. He'd kept that promise through survival and struggle and the slow, grinding work of being enough for a daughter who needed more than one person could provide alone. But he'd learned something Linda had tried to tell Emily before she died. Love doesn't run out, it multiplies. Taking care of their girl meant building a life where Emily had everything she needed, including a father who was still standing and a woman who'd learned to smile again, and the kind of family that chose each other instead of accepting what circumstance provided. The lady in gray had learned to smile. The widower had learned to love again. The wise child had taught them both that survival was just the beginning, that living required the kind of brave vulnerability neither of them had thought they could afford. They'd been wrong about what they could afford, and right about what mattered. That was enough. That was everything.